When most people think of the devil, or Lucifer, a vivid image comes to mind. Horns, fire, malevolent eyes, and the embodiment of pure evil. It's a character that has dominated literature, art, and film for centuries. But when you actually open the Bible, you discover something far more surprising. The figure we call Lucifer barely gets mentioned. He isn't the looming presence that popular culture has made him out to be. In fact, the idea of a singular, all-powerful devil who tempts humanity is more of a later invention than a biblical fact. The term Lucifer itself appears only once in most translations of the Bible, in Isaiah 14:12. And even then, the passage is about the fall of a Babylonian king, not some cosmic evil being plotting against humanity. The Latin Vulgate translation uses Lucifer, meaning morning star, and somehow, over centuries, it became associated with Satan. This is a subtle shift, but one that completely changed how millions of people imagine the nature of evil. It's a reminder of how translations and cultural interpretations can reshape a narrative into something almost unrecognizable. When you dig deeper, the Bible rarely paints a picture of a singular devil orchestrating chaos. In the Hebrew Bible, or Old Testament, Satan is more of an accuser or adversary, sometimes even acting as a sort of divine agent. In the book of Job, for instance, Satan appears before God and suggests testing Job's faith. He's not rebelling, plotting the fall of humanity, or waging a war on earth. He's performing a function within a divine bureaucracy, almost like a prosecutor in a heavenly court. This portrayal is miles away from the fiery demon that dominates Halloween imagery and pop culture. New Testament texts shift the narrative somewhat. Here, Satan starts to take on a more active role as a tempter, a figure opposing Jesus and representing moral failure. Yet even in these writings, the stories are brief and functional. The devil appears in a few key episodes, tempting Jesus in the wilderness, opposing certain apostles, or in general representing spiritual opposition. There's no grand, detailed biography, no intricate schemes spanning eons, no clear motivation beyond simply opposing God or leading humans astray. The character is almost skeletal, a placeholder more than a fully formed personality. What's fascinating is how this vague and infrequently mentioned figure became central to Western culture's concept of evil. During the medieval period, theologians and artists elaborated on Lucifer and Satan, turning a minor biblical footnote into an elaborate mythology. Dante's Inferno, Milton's Paradise Lost, and countless church teachings fleshed him out into a dramatic, charismatic villain. This is storytelling at its most persuasive, a blend of selective interpretation, cultural reinforcement, and dramatic license. Over time, the devil went from a minor adversary to a global symbol of fear, guilt, and moral panic. This expansion of the devil's role also had real-world effects. During the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, fears about demonic influence justified inquisitions, witch hunts, and strict moral codes. People blamed personal failures, natural disasters, or social unrest on the work of a malevolent, supernatural being. The psychological impact was massive. It wasn't just about religion, it was about control. By projecting evil onto an external, all-powerful figure, authorities could enforce obedience and guilt, while ordinary people internalized fear. Understanding this shift helps explain why the devil feels so omnipresent today, even though his textual footprint is surprisingly small. Modern culture has amplified the image even further. Movies, TV shows, and literature have given him personality, motives, and charisma. He's charming, cunning, and morally complex far more than the biblical texts ever describe. And yet, when people base their understanding on this media-driven version, they're often unaware that the original sources barely mention him. This is important because it highlights a broader point. Human imagination, fear, and storytelling can transform a sparse textual reference into a fully realized archetype that shapes centuries of thought and behavior. There's also a linguistic angle that often goes unnoticed. The Hebrew word Satan simply means adversary or accuser. It was a functional term rather than a proper name. Over time, this functional role morphed into a personal being in later interpretations. Similarly, phrases like "the devil made me do it" are not grounded in scripture, but in folklore and cultural storytelling. The devil becomes a convenient scapegoat, a personification of human flaws and societal fears. When we examine the texts closely, the evidence for an all-powerful evil entity is remarkably thin. What's even more striking is how the image of Lucifer or Satan was shaped less by scripture and more by human imagination. Over centuries, religious authorities, artists, and storytellers filled in gaps, giving him personality, motivation, and even backstory. In Milton's Paradise Lost, for instance, Lucifer is a tragic anti-hero, eloquent, ambitious, and charismatic. He becomes a symbol of rebellion and pride, yet none of these traits are present in the sparse biblical references. This is storytelling layered over scripture, transforming a minor textual figure into a cultural icon of evil. Psychologically, the appeal of the devil makes sense. Humans are wired to personify abstract threats. It's easier to conceptualize moral failure, personal struggle, or societal chaos as the work of a single, malevolent figure than to grapple with complex systems, randomness, or human behavior. This personification externalizes responsibility. When something goes wrong, it's tempting to blame the devil instead of examining our own choices or the circumstances around us. This dynamic has played a powerful role in shaping moral thinking and social control over millennia. Historically, the devil's role expanded in direct response to social anxieties. During periods of plague, famine, and war, fear of evil forces often intensified. Religious authorities could claim that human suffering was the result of demonic influence or moral decay. Witch hunts in Europe, for example, were justified in part by the belief that Satan was actively corrupting human society. People accused of consorting with the devil were subjected to brutal trials and executions. These events highlight a chilling reality. A barely mentioned scriptural figure could be amplified into a tool of fear and oppression. Even in modern times, the cultural power of the devil persists, though in subtler ways. Horror films, television, and literature continue to portray him as a manipulative, almost omniscient figure. Advertising, pop culture, and media amplify these images, reinforcing the sense of a lurking evil presence. It's fascinating that an entity referenced so minimally in religious texts can dominate the imagination so thoroughly. The devil functions as a mirror, reflecting human anxieties, moral dilemmas, and fascination with rebellion. In many ways, he's more a cultural creation than a theological one. From a sociological perspective, the devil also serves as a boundary marker. He defines what is forbidden, dangerous, or immoral. By projecting the abstract concept of evil onto a figure, societies have created a clear other to unify against. This is evident in the strict moral codes and taboos that surround behavior considered sinful. But if you examine scripture carefully, the lines aren't always so rigid. The narrative of a singular, omnipotent devil is far less central than many assume. In reality, ethical responsibility is often more human-centered, and consequences are frequently framed in social or spiritual rather than cosmic terms. When considering the Bible's portrayal, it becomes clear that the devil is not an all-controlling force orchestrating events. In the Hebrew texts, he's functional. In the New Testament, he's limited in scope and influence. He does not act independently of divine oversight in most cases. The image of a rebellious angel plotting humanity's downfall is largely a product of interpretation, translation quirks, and centuries of cultural storytelling. What we think of as Satan today is almost unrecognizable from the figure in Scripture. One of the most under-discussed aspects is how early Christian writings contributed to the embellishment of the devil. Apocryphal texts, extra-biblical writings, and sermons painted vivid pictures of Lucifer's rebellion, his army of demons, and his schemes to corrupt humanity. These stories filled in gaps, making abstract concepts tangible and terrifying. Over time, they were incorporated into folk belief and popular culture, further distancing the figure from the sparse scriptural references. What began as a functional adversary became a detailed, morally charged character. It's also worth noting the role of language in shaping perception. Words like Satan, devil, and Lucifer were not originally personal names, but titles or descriptors. The semantic shift over centuries turned them into a singular, coherent villain. This is an example of how interpretation can solidify into doctrine, even when the original texts offer little support. Misunderstandings, combined with the human tendency for narrative elaboration, created the foundation for centuries of fear, moral judgment, and cultural fascination with evil. The modern fascination with the devil also reveals a lot about human psychology. People are drawn to stories of rebellion, power, and forbidden knowledge. The figure of Lucifer embodies these themes perfectly. He's often portrayed as alluring, clever, and defiant traits that many admire in a purely narrative sense. This attraction has little to do with religion itself and everything to do with human storytelling. We project desires, fears, and moral lessons onto him. He becomes a kind of canvas for exploring morality, temptation, and the consequences of choices. Even outside of literature and media, the devil's influence is visible in culture. Expressions like selling your soul, the devil made me do it, or warnings against the devil's temptations permeate language. These phrases shape thought, behavior, and moral frameworks, often without people realizing the historical and textual thinness behind them. Linguistically, they reinforce the illusion of an omnipresent evil entity. The devil functions as shorthand for human weakness, moral failure, or misfortune. Real-life cases also illustrate how fear of a malevolent figure can manipulate behavior. Consider historical witch hunts, moral panics about occult practices, or contemporary conspiracy theories that invoke Satan as a hidden hand behind societal problems. These events show the power of belief, even in something scarcely mentioned in Scripture. By attributing complex social or personal issues to a singular supernatural figure, societies and individuals simplify moral reasoning and assign blame externally. It's a psychological shortcut, but one that has had real, often tragic consequences. There's also an ironic dimension to this cultural obsession. A figure that is barely present in primary religious texts has been expanded into an entity that dominates moral imagination. People spend lifetimes fearing, debating, or attempting to understand a character that, by textual standards, hardly exists. This suggests that human creativity, narrative drive, and the need for moral exemplars can outweigh original textual authority. The devil, in this sense, is less a biblical figure and more testament to the power of collective storytelling. Interestingly, the divergence between scripture and culture has led to some contradictory depictions. In some traditions, Satan is omnipotent and actively influencing human affairs. In others, he is subordinate to God, limited in scope, and almost bureaucratic in function. These inconsistencies highlight a broader truth. The devil, as popularly imagined, is a patchwork of interpretations, myths, translations, and artistic flourishes. There's no singular authoritative description. There's only a heavily constructed cultural symbol. The evolution of the devil also reflects broader trends in human thinking about morality and evil. Early texts often presented ethical challenges as human responsibilities rather than supernatural manipulations. Job suffers, humans sin, wars happen, but rarely is there a consistent cosmic puppet master behind every misfortune. The later expansion of the devil filled this gap, offering an external villain for human failings. It's a pattern that repeats across cultures. Abstract concepts of evil get personified, giving people a tangible target for blame, fear, or fascination. In some ways, this makes the figure of Lucifer a mirror of human imagination. He adapts to the concerns, anxieties, and moral frameworks of each era. In the Middle Ages, he was a terrifying punisher of sin. In Renaissance literature, a charismatic rebel. Today, he can be a pop culture anti-hero, a metaphor for challenging authority, or a symbol of personal temptation. Yet, at every stage, the textual foundation remains surprisingly minimal. The cultural weight far exceeds the scriptural footprint. Another layer worth exploring is the political and social utility of the devil. Religious authorities have historically used the concept to enforce obedience, justify punishment, or control moral behavior. If a community fears a malevolent supernatural force, it is easier to enforce rules, instill guilt, and maintain social cohesion. The devil becomes a tool for governance and moral policing, and yet, in the original texts, there's little instruction on how to worship, appease, or avoid him. The practical consequences of belief outweigh the scriptural evidence. This gap between text and culture also opens space for reinterpretation. Some scholars argue that our modern conception of Satan says more about human society than it does about religion. He embodies fear, desire, rebellion, and morality in a single symbol. By studying the evolution of this figure, we gain insight into psychology, history, literature, and social control, even as we acknowledge that the Bible barely mentions him. The legend of Lucifer is, in many ways, a story humans have told about themselves more than about any divine being. When we look at the modern image of Lucifer, it's hard not to notice how much it reflects human preoccupations rather than scripture. In movies, TV, and literature, he is often a symbol of temptation, charisma, and moral choice. In some stories, he is charming and witty, even relatable. In others, he is terrifying and destructive. This duality mirrors our own understanding of morality. Good and evil are often less about divine decree and more about human judgment, personal consequences, and cultural storytelling. Consider the popularity of shows and books where Lucifer is the protagonist. Here, the devil is no longer a minor adversary from ancient texts, but a fully fleshed character navigating human dilemmas. People engage with these stories because they explore universal themes: freedom, rebellion, the tension between rules and desire, and the consequences of moral choices. The fascination isn't with spiritual fear, but with human psychology, why we make choices, why we obey rules, why we struggle with morality. The devil becomes a narrative tool to explore these questions. This shift also exposes a subtle truth about religion and morality. By elevating the devil into a cosmic villain, many traditions externalize moral responsibility. Temptation is cast as something outside ourselves rather than a reflection of human nature. If someone fails, it's not a human error, it's the devil's influence. This removes agency and reduces personal accountability, replacing it with fear of external forces. Over time, it creates a society more guided by avoidance of supernatural punishment than by rational, ethical reasoning. Historical cases reinforce this. Accusations of demonic influence were often leveled against those whose behavior deviated from societal norms. Non-conforming women, political rivals, or marginalized groups were branded as in league with the devil. In this way, the idea of a malevolent being became a tool for social regulation, allowing authorities to enforce conformity and suppress dissent under the guise of moral or spiritual necessity. The real power of the devil was never supernatural. It was cultural and psychological. Even in contemporary times, we see remnants of this influence. Fear-based religious teachings, moral panic narratives, and conspiracy theories often invoke the devil to explain otherwise complex phenomena. These stories simplify the world, turning uncertainty, randomness, or human error into a battle between good and evil. It's a compelling narrative structure, but one that departs entirely from the biblical account, where the devil is rarely central and never omnipotent. This brings us to another important point: the danger of myth outpacing reality. The figure of Lucifer teaches us how stories, once amplified and repeated over centuries, can take on a life of their own. They can influence behavior, shape societies, and even justify violence, all while the original texts provide little evidence for such a powerful, individualized evil. What began as a minor adversary in Scripture became a cultural leviathan illustrating the power of collective belief and narrative construction. Psychologically, this amplification also satisfies a need for narrative closure. Humans crave stories with identifiable villains, clear moral lessons, and dramatic stakes. Abstract concepts like misfortune, disease, or societal breakdown don't provide the same narrative satisfaction. By personifying evil, we create stories that are emotionally and cognitively manageable. The devil fills that gap. He's a concise representation of threat, temptation, and moral consequence. And once this figure was established, it became self-reinforcing. The more culture depicted him, the more real he felt, even without textual support. There's also a subtle, ironic twist. The more we fear and obsess over the devil, the more he becomes a mirror of ourselves. Stories of Lucifer often highlight human traits: ambition, curiosity, rebellion, pride. By attributing these qualities to a supernatural being, we externalize internal conflicts and anxieties. This allows us to examine morality indirectly, through narrative and allegory, rather than confronting the complexities of human psychology directly. In this way, the devil is less a force in the world and more a lens through which we understand ourselves. At the same time, the cultural construction of the devil has contributed to an enduring fascination with evil itself. People are drawn to horror, crime stories, and moral dilemmas because they offer a safe space to explore fear. Lucifer becomes a focal point for this exploration, embodying the dangers we want to study without directly experiencing. The intensity of this fascination often far exceeds anything suggested by Scripture, underscoring the human drive to expand stories beyond their original context. Finally, the case of Lucifer challenges assumptions about authority and belief. If a figure can be so culturally dominant while being minimally present in sacred texts, It raises questions about how humans adopt, interpret, and transmit ideas. Fear, fascination, and storytelling can outweigh textual evidence. Our understanding of evil, morality, and temptation is shaped less by scripture than by centuries of human imagination, artistic elaboration, and social reinforcement. Lucifer is a product of culture as much as religion, and perhaps more so. One aspect that rarely gets attention is how different societies interpreted Lucifer and Satan in ways that suited local anxieties. In medieval Europe, for example, the devil was often depicted as a grotesque animalistic creature, reflecting fears of sin, sexuality, and social disorder. In other cultures influenced by Christianity, he could appear more subtle, cunning, or even invisible, embodying abstract threats rather than physical terror. These variations reveal a pattern. The devil adapts to human fears rather than dictating them. He's a mirror of the collective imagination. Historical accounts also show that the devil functioned as a scapegoat. Wars, famines, epidemics, and political upheaval were frequently attributed to demonic influence. Rulers, clergy, and even ordinary people found it convenient to personify misfortune. Instead of examining human error, environmental factors, or systemic problems, attributing events to a malevolent being offered a simple explanation and a target for fear and anger. This externalization of blame is psychologically convenient but historically problematic. Even the concept of demonic possession, which plays such a central role in cultural depictions of evil, is largely absent or ambiguous in the Bible. Many of the so-called exorcism accounts are context-specific stories that reflect social and medical understandings of the time. Over centuries, these were sensationalized, turned into cautionary tales, and ultimately woven into a broader mythology of the devil's power. The result is a figure that feels omnipresent and terrifying, but whose actual textual basis is fragmentary at best. Another under-discussed point is how the devil's story intersects with human morality. In the biblical texts, moral failure often results from human choice, not demonic coercion. Adam and Eve, for example, act out of curiosity and disobedience. The serpent is only part of the story. Similarly, Job's trials reflect tests of character rather than Satan's independent scheming. Over time, interpretations shifted blame outward, and the devil became a convenient agent for moral explanations. This shift subtly alters ethical thinking, suggesting external temptation rather than personal responsibility. Culturally, this shift has been reinforced by art, literature, and performance. From the grotesque demons of Gothic cathedrals to Renaissance paintings of hell, the devil was given form, narrative, and drama. These depictions were not mere decoration, they taught lessons, reinforced fear, and dramatized moral choices. The image of Lucifer, painted, sculpted, and described, became more memorable than the textual mentions themselves. Art outpaced scripture, shaping collective imagination in ways that the original authors never intended. In psychology, the devil functions as both projection and metaphor. People project their fears, desires, and social anxieties onto him, creating a tangible other to explain uncertainty or moral tension. At the same time, he serves as a metaphor for internal struggle. Temptation, pride, envy, ambition, and rebellion are all qualities humans attribute to themselves, then externalize onto a single figure. This dual role, psychological and metaphorical, explains why the figure remains compelling across centuries, even when religious authority diminishes. Even today, many use Lucifer as a symbol rather than a literal being. Writers, philosophers, and artists invoke him to explore rebellion, knowledge, and ethical complexity. He becomes a tool for questioning authority, examining human nature, and dramatizing moral dilemmas. The Bible may barely mention him, but culture has amplified his presence exponentially. In effect, Lucifer has become a cultural and intellectual artifact, a symbol shaped by centuries of human thought, fear, and imagination. Obscure historical cases also highlight the social utility of the devil myth. In colonial America, accusations of satanic influence were often used to control communities, enforce conformity, or explain the inexplicable. In Europe, demonology manuals instructed priests and inquisitors on recognizing and combating evil, blending superstition, social control, and theology. The figure of Lucifer served as a convenient anchor for moral and social order, a touchstone for fear and authority. At the same time, the minimal scriptural presence of the devil suggests a radical reinterpretation is possible. If the original texts portray Satan as functional, limited, or symbolic, then centuries of elaboration represent cultural rather than divine construction. Understanding this opens a window into how humans create narratives to explain the unknown, manage fear, and explore morality. The devil becomes less an independent force and more a reflection of human thought processes, social pressures, and artistic imagination. Finally, the story of Lucifer reminds us of the power of narrative over evidence. A figure barely mentioned in Scripture has dominated moral imagination, influenced culture, justified social control, and inspired literature, art, and media for centuries. The legend of the devil is not just a religious tale. It's a case study in how humans amplify, embellish, and mythologize ideas. In the end, the greatest power of Lucifer is not supernatural, but cultural, the ability to persist in human thought long after the original texts have been written, translated, and largely ignored. In contemporary culture, the image of Lucifer continues to evolve, often far removed from biblical texts. He appears in novels, television shows, movies, and even video games as a complex, almost relatable character. Sometimes he's charming, witty, and morally ambiguous, a figure we can sympathize with or even admire. This shift reflects a broader cultural fascination with rebellion, individuality, and ethical complexity. In many ways, modern depictions are less about religion and more about exploring human nature, freedom, and consequences. One of the most interesting aspects is how media allows us to engage with moral questions safely. By projecting our fears and desires onto a symbolic figure like Lucifer, we can explore ethical dilemmas without real-world consequences. He becomes a narrative device for examining temptation, ambition, pride, and rebellion. The stories we tell about him often reveal as much about ourselves as they do about the concept of evil. In this sense, the modern devil functions as a cultural tool for self-reflection and ethical exploration, rather than a theological entity. Another layer is the psychological appeal of rebellion. Humans are naturally drawn to stories that challenge authority or question rigid moral codes. Lucifer, as a rebellious figure, embodies the tension between constraint and freedom. This appeal transcends religion. It doesn't matter that the biblical texts barely give him a role. His mythic presence fills a human need for narrative drama, moral conflict, and exploration of the forbidden. The devil becomes a canvas for projecting questions about autonomy, morality, and personal responsibility. Real-world examples also show how belief in the devil continues to influence behavior even when abstracted from Scripture. In certain communities, fears of demonic influence still shape morality, social norms, and personal decisions. Rituals, exorcisms, and warnings against temptation can create psychological pressure and social conformity. Here again, the influence of the devil is cultural, not textual. His power comes from human belief, imagination, and the stories we tell ourselves about good and evil. This leads to a crucial insight. The devil's endurance is a reflection of human storytelling, not divine instruction. A figure that is barely mentioned in ancient texts has persisted, adapted, and thrived because humans need narratives to explain fear, failure, and moral complexity. The more the stories are told, the more compelling he becomes. Over time, a sparsely documented adversary becomes a central figure in morality tales, pop culture, and even personal ethical reasoning. Modern reinterpretations also play with the idea of moral relativity. In some media, Lucifer is not purely evil. He is questioning authority, seeking justice, or challenging hypocrisy. This reimagining aligns with a broader cultural trend, exploring morality as a spectrum rather than a binary of good versus evil. It's a reflection of secular thinking, narrative complexity, and psychological fears, depth. By focusing on character and choice rather than divine command, these stories shift the conversation from fear of punishment to understanding human behavior. Even when stripped of supernatural claims, the cultural power of Lucifer is undeniable. He functions as a symbol, a psychological construct, and a narrative tool. He embodies rebellion, curiosity, pride, and moral ambiguity. He allows humans to confront fear and temptation in a safe, symbolic space. And critically, all of this has grown out of centuries of interpretation, embellishment, and storytelling rather than the original biblical passages. Looking at the historical trajectory, the evolution of Lucifer reveals the intersection of belief, culture, and imagination. A minimally described figure in Scripture became an omnipresent cultural archetype through translation, interpretation, artistic expression, and storytelling. This process highlights a fascinating aspect of human thought. We have the capacity to expand, elaborate, and mythologize ideas far beyond their original context. Fear, curiosity, and creativity combine to transform a footnote in Scripture into a symbol with enduring psychological and cultural impact. Finally, the story of Lucifer encourages reflection on morality, belief, and human imagination. It demonstrates how easily ideas can grow beyond their sources, how narratives shape behavior, and how culture amplifies concepts to create enduring symbols. The devil's influence is not supernatural, but psychological and cultural. His power lies in what humans do with the idea, how we project fear, assign blame, explore rebellion, and wrestle with questions of right and wrong. The biblical Lucifer may be fleeting, but the human-made Lucifer is timeless. One of the most underexplored angles is the philosophical dimension of Lucifer as a symbol. Across centuries, thinkers have used him to examine free will, authority, and moral responsibility. In Milton, he challenges God not just out of malice, but from pride, curiosity, and a desire for autonomy. Even if this is literary license, it highlights a profound question. What does it mean to defy authority? And who decides what is right or wrong? The figure of Lucifer invites reflection on ethics in a way that transcends religion, turning a minor biblical footnote into a tool for critical thought. This also exposes a subtle irony. The devil, often framed as the ultimate source of evil, is rarely capable of independent action in Scripture. In most passages, he operates under divine permission or within specific constraints. Yet culturally, he has been imbued with limitless power, omniscience, and cunning. This discrepancy is striking. It shows how narrative and imagination can inflate the significance of an idea far beyond its textual origins. The devil we know is a product of centuries of collective storytelling, not the original writings. Historical obscurities reveal how different interpretations were influenced by local anxieties. During the European witch trials, Satan was depicted as a manipulative force controlling witches, influencing crops, weather, and communities. In colonial America, satanic influence was cited in moral panics and legal cases, often targeting those who were socially marginalized. The cultural construction of the devil served as a convenient explanation for fears that were otherwise difficult to articulate or control. These examples illustrate that the figure's power has always been more social and psychological than theological. There's also an overlooked element in the translation of Scripture. Words like Satan and Lucifer evolved in meaning over time, and translators sometimes imposed concepts that weren't originally present. Satan in Hebrew simply means adversary or accuser, while Lucifer originally referred to the morning star. These linguistic shifts contributed to a mythology of cosmic rebellion, even though the original texts make no such claims. This is a reminder of how fragile ideas become fixed in cultural consciousness through interpretation rather than evidence. Another aspect is how the devil functions as a mirror of human psychology. In literature, theology, and folklore, he embodies ambition, pride, temptation, and defiance traits that humans wrestle with personally. By externalizing these traits onto a single figure, people create a safe space to explore internal conflict. We confront moral dilemmas, desire, and fear through the narrative of the devil without facing real consequences. He becomes a symbolic laboratory for examining human behavior, morality, and social norms. Modern reinterpretations continue this trend. TV shows, books, and movies often present Lucifer as an anti-hero, someone who challenges hypocrisy, questions authority, and acts morally in complex ways. These depictions explore ethics in shades of grey, reflecting contemporary interest in nuanced morality. They highlight the divergence between scripture and culture. The Bible presents a limited, functional adversary, while modern storytelling elevates him to a complex, psychologically rich figure. This evolution underscores how human imagination and social context shape myth. There's also a philosophical lesson in the devil's persistence. A figure with minimal scriptural presence has influenced ethics, literature, psychology, and culture for centuries. This teaches a broader principle. Ideas can become powerful through repetition, interpretation, and narrative, regardless of their origin. Lucifer exemplifies the human tendency to amplify concepts that resonate emotionally, socially, or morally. His story is less about divine truth and more about the ways humans construct meaning, moral frameworks, and cultural touchstones. Finally, the enduring fascination with Lucifer highlights a paradox. He is a figure invented and elaborated upon to explain human fears, yet he also becomes a lens to understand ourselves. By exaggerating a minor textual figure into a symbol of ultimate evil, society's created a mirror for human behavior, morality, and imagination. We see ambition, temptation, rebellion, and fear projected onto him, and in doing so, we explore the complexities of our own ethical and psychological lives. The minimal biblical mention contrasts sharply with the enormous cultural and psychological footprint he occupies. What emerges from this exploration is a striking contrast between text and culture. The biblical figure of Lucifer is minimal, functional, and often symbolic. Yet over centuries, he has grown into an omnipresent cultural icon, embodying rebellion, temptation, pride, and fear. The transformation shows how humans amplify ideas to meet psychological, social, and moral needs. The devil is less a being with independent existence than a mirror of human imagination and concern. This also forces reflection on morality itself. The cultural obsession with Lucifer highlights how humans externalize evil. By attributing misfortune, moral failure, or societal chaos to a supernatural agent, responsibility can be displaced. History provides countless examples of this. Witch hunts, moral panics, and social regulation all leveraged belief in a malevolent force. Yet the biblical texts offer little support for this expansive image. The story of Lucifer illustrates how moral narratives can evolve independently of their sources, shaped by fear, culture, and imagination. Even today, the figure continues to serve as a lens through which humans examine themselves. Writers, artists, and thinkers invoke Lucifer not to recount scripture, but to explore autonomy, rebellion, ethical dilemmas, and the tension between desire and restraint. In this way, the devil becomes a tool for reflection, not worship or fear. He is a symbolic playground for understanding human behavior, ambition, and morality, a reminder that myth, when amplified by culture, can outgrow its origins and take on a life of its own. This evolution also demonstrates the power of narrative. A figure barely mentioned in sacred texts has shaped centuries of literature, art, psychology, and moral thought. The process shows how humans create meaning. We take fragments, interpret them, expand them, and invest them with significance. Over time, repetition and cultural reinforcement make these ideas feel undeniable, even when they originated as sparse, incidental mentions in ancient texts. Lucifer is a case study in how storytelling shapes thought and culture. It is worth noting the subtle tension between fear and fascination. Lucifer represents danger, rebellion, and temptation, yet he is endlessly captivating. This duality is central to his endurance. Humans are drawn to stories that challenge authority and explore taboo, even as we warn ourselves against them. He becomes a character through which we engage with both fear and curiosity. This paradox, attraction, and repulsion is a hallmark of enduring myth, and it explains why the devil continues to hold cultural power despite minimal scriptural foundation. Ultimately, the story of Lucifer offers a broader lesson about belief, culture, and human imagination. Ideas, once released into society, can evolve far beyond their origins. They interact with psychology, history, art, and social dynamics to produce phenomena that no single author or text could have predicted. The devil, barely mentioned in scripture, has become an archetype that allows humans to grapple with fear, morality, and identity. His power is not supernatural, it is cultural, psychological, and symbolic. So when we think about the figure of Lucifer today, it is worth asking, how much of what we know is actually text, and how much is collective imagination? How much fear and fascination are reflections of human creativity rather than divine truth? The story of the devil challenges assumptions, encourages critical thinking, and reveals the extraordinary capacity of humans to mythologize, dramatize, and explore abstract concepts. In the end, Lucifer is a mirror not of divine malevolence, but of human thought, culture, and imagination. By examining the origins, evolution, and impact of Lucifer, we see that myths can outgrow their sources, shaping behavior and thought across centuries. A minor adversary in Scripture became an omnipresent cultural icon because humans needed him, feared him, and found meaning in his story. The devil, in every sense that matters, exists because humans made him real. And in recognizing this, we gain insight not just into religious history, but into ourselves, our fears, our moral reasoning, and our boundless capacity for imagination